What would it take for you to give up everything you have and everything you are to save someone you love? It's an odd question, but one that I'm sure you've thought of from time to time. Would they have to be in mortal danger, or would that person have to have lost a critical part of themselves that, to save them, you would give up what made you, you? It's a kind of Faustian thought experiment that plenty of games, movies, and stories have explored in great detail, which always tugs at the heartstrings. In the case of Kingdom Hearts, we not only get this kind of exchange, but an expansion upon it, where Riku, essentially playing the role of Faust, does everything in his power to save Kairi and return her to her normal self, but in the process loses himself to the darkness. And by the time we've stood up to Riku and sent him scurrying away with his tail between his legs, it's clear that Riku is no longer in the business of saving Kairi, but controlling her, and by proxy, controlling Sora. When Riku claimed the Keyblade from us, you can clearly see that it's taken by force to the point that it almost looks painful, like a piece of us has been torn from our body and corrupted by uncaring hands. And then when Sora realizes his strength and reclaims that Keyblade, you can see that it calmly and easily slides from Riku's fingers to rejoin Sora's. It's a consenting type of control that will always win out over the forced taking that Riku has come to learn from the company that he keeps. A lesson that Riku can't seem to wrap his head around, as each Disney villain is taken out one by one for attempting to forcibly take and control what they desire most. A lesson that is now lost to Riku as he heeds the words of a devil in disguise and opens himself to the darkness and becomes something beyond his comprehension. Now, there's an entire subtext here about consent, control, and manipulation, but let's save that for another time. As Sora and the gang, after opening the entrance hall door, are led into the lift stop, a tall corridor that we'll be weaving in and out of pretty regularly throughout our time here in Hollow Bastion. And thankfully, this small section only has a defender standing in our way that we can easily jump over. But stepping back outside to the castle gates, we're immediately set upon by one of the new Heartless of this world, the Wyverns. A fitting Heartless for this world, as this beast and castles go hand in hand. But if you know anything about this world, you know that we'll have a better opportunity to discuss this incredible creature a little further in. Also, please do be careful when facing off against the Wyverns and air soldiers here, as a falling off will bring you down to the icy depths, forcing you to walk all the way back, past the library, and through the entrance hall again. But heading up the small lift around the corner, we'll head onto a higher platform with a much larger lift that's meant to take us to the other side of the castle. I mean, this doesn't look so ominous, as this may look like an arena that gives us plenty of space to run around it. Yep. Who would have guessed it, that this is in fact an arena for us to fight in. This time, against Wizard Heartless, another fitting Heartless to the castle aesthetic, as the concept of wizards harkens back to the tales of Merlin as a wise old man with advanced knowledge of the supernatural. Now, we've talked about Merlin extensively when we visited Traverse Town that second time around, but what I hadn't fully discussed then that I'd like to discuss now is the belief surrounding magic and its use throughout history that led us to now seeing this Heartless and knowing exactly what they are from appearance alone. Known by various names in various contexts, magic users or practitioners of the mystical arts are a fascinating group within myths and legends that can be traced back to the earliest civilizations that we know of. Within ancient Mesopotamia, magic was not only a supernatural force that helped many priests and practitioners to ward off bad omens or violent demons, but also as an everyday belief that was seen as the norm. For if a person was sick and needed to see a doctor, that person would receive both medical treatment as well as incantations to help heal them spiritually, as many sought a more holistic approach to healing to ensure that a person wasn't condemned by a curse. What's more is that the role of magicians was highly respected within Sumerian and even Assyrian cultures during their time, as the role within their societies were highly prestigious and would be passed down through the generations or even from master to apprentice as time went on. And to say that this kind of view and belief was solely this culture's would be a huge understatement, as cultures all over the world held this same sort of view for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptians, for instance, regularly utilized incantations and rituals that were considered to be magic to help ease the dead in their passing, allowing the dead to pass their trials as they entered into the duat, or the field of reeds. In many East Asian cultures, for instance, their view on magic revolved primarily around ancestral worship and through their ancient animistic beliefs, believing that magic came from the spirits and the deified ancestors that inhabited all different aspects of life, such as trees, the wind, rivers, and so on. Moreover, shamanism within the region as a legitimate craft would grow in popularity through the dynasties and eventually spread into the connecting regions of Korea and Japan sometime prior to the 3rd century BCE, where these shamans helped many, especially those in power, to commune with the dead or divine, where they often used incantations and incense to aid in telling the stories of the past to help guide the future. That said, the view of magic as an everyday practice would shift over time to an uneasy acceptance as monotheism became more commonplace throughout the world. Even among the Greeks, who viewed Hecate as a goddess of magic and of witchcraft, began to actually separate themselves from her as they grew more accustomed to the Persian Zoroastrianism that they came in contact with through their constant conflicts with them. And eventually, with the rise of Hebrew law and even Christianity, magic became more supernatural and separate from its political and religious holdings, which would subsequently help in shaping the people's perceptions of magicians through figures like Merlin, creating the wizard that we now see today that are constantly represented throughout the fantasy genre. I would also like to mention that throughout the complex history of magicians, shamans, and many other practitioners of the mystical arts, tools such as staves, wands, and even incantation bowls have been synonymous with this role since its early days, as within the Homeric epic of the Odyssey, Circe is thought to have used a wand to transform men into animals. Then, by the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, fairy tales would use the wand to portray the magic of the natural world, leading to the wizards we now fight against here in Hollow Bastion, who use the wizard's relic, a droppable item that is considered to be one of the best weapons for Donald, as it provides increased MP and stands as a relic of the past. But with these wizards defeated, we're allowed to continue our path to the other side of the castle now, where we can gather a few items thanks to the chest and Trinity mark on this side of the platform. But leaving here, we'll enter the lift stop once again to quickly make our way up and back out to the castle gates. Honestly, with all these lift stops and heading up them, and I'd just rather take a stairway to heaven at this point. No, not that. I have enough trouble as it is with copyright. In any case, this is actually a pretty good opportunity to talk about these lift stops, as you never would have guessed that there'd be a mythological aspect with these. Okay, well, not with the lifts themselves, but with the area that they are placed in. Pointed out to me by my good friend 2C Phoenix, he noted that gamers don't really look up that much when it comes to their favorite games, and often miss some of the more incredible details that the designers put in. So let's try to fix that. Just look up from here, and you'll find the most incredible stained glass art that is absolutely awe-inspiring. The lighting, the symmetry, the sheer grandiose of it all, it makes you wonder about its creation here in this dark, war-torn world that is a Hollow Bastion. However, this isn't the only place we've seen such incredible stained glass art. Because if you remember, at the start of the game, we began our journey by walking along the stained glass towers that depicted many of the Disney princesses. And what I didn't explain then is all the more fitting to explain here. As an art form, stained glass has been around for hundreds of years, and continues to be one of the foremost artistic expressions, drawing in the masses to its gorgeous mosaics, depicting at times full scenes of the apocalypse like the Last Judgment windows here at the Strasbourg Cathedral in France, or others like the Five Sisters windows here in York Minster in the UK, depicting geometric shapes and patterns. And with a variety of portrayals, designs, and purposes, these constructed glass panes tell the story of a deep fondness for mythology and the history that makes them what they are today. Primarily seen within churches and cathedrals, stained glass murals are rooted in the rich religious history of Europe. With the craft growing in popularity throughout the medieval period, it's thought to have had more humble beginnings. Dating to around 2700 BCE, Egyptian artisans are thought to have been the first people to begin melting and molding colored glass into ornamental beads for both social and religious purposes. And over the next 3,000 years, different cultures would begin to craft their own works of art as the use of colored glass grew in popularity. The Phoenicians, who helped in the formation of the alphabet, were also among the first major manufacturers of glass, spreading the knowledge of glassmaking and its coloring process as their industry grew. And over time, this knowledge and use of glassmaking would begin to take hold within the Christian faith, as it became the predominant religion throughout Europe, with the first use of stained glass windows as art being in the St. Paul's Monastery in Jarrow, England, allowing light and color to enter an otherwise darkened room. From there, stained glass windows became commonplace in churches, mosques, and cathedrals throughout the Middle Ages. I don't think I have to explain just how beautiful some of these pieces are as the light of the day dances through them and onto the floor or walls of these sanctuaries. But what became so popular about them were the stories that they expressed, with some, like the windows of Canterbury Cathedral, depicting different stories from the Christian Bible as the light moved throughout the day, providing many within the church and many others visiting it with what's known as a poor man's Bible, for those who wished to see the stories played out visually. Of course, the use of stained glass wasn't strictly a Christian art form, as with the rise of Islam during the Middle Ages and throughout the Renaissance, stained glass windows would simultaneously grow in use throughout the Arab world. Though many stained glass windows in Islamic mosques wouldn't serve as visual stories for worshippers, they would instead provide a large amount of color to pour into the halls to help express the color and life that God brought into the world. In addition, many would also provide some short verses from the Quran to help remind the congregation of their devotion to God, while others depicted God's differing names in Arabic. Overall, just as we look at many ancient Greek pottery paintings or ancient Egyptian reliefs as art pieces to depict the stories, history, and culture of those people, so too do we look at stained glass with that same perspective, acting as not only a relief to tell the stories within the Abrahamic faiths, but also as a way to share with us, as either worshippers or visitors, that there is still beauty to this world that perhaps through a different lens, we can find the color that our world has to offer. And though the stained glass windows here in Hollow Bastion may not tell a story as much as they do within the various cathedrals that inspired these pieces, they still shine a light here in this darkened world. A light that will never go out, no matter how dark it may get. Reaching the upper level of the castle's exterior, there are two methods for us to progress to reach the next section of this world. With this first method, we'll need to lower these two pillars to make a platform that allows us to jump up to the small balcony that we see here, as this is exactly where we need to go. Fighting the horde of Heartless can be a little troublesome, but thankfully with our friends having our backs now, we can power through these enemies without much issue, leading to the switch here to become available to lower that first platform. Returning to the lift room after that and making our way to the other side of the castle's exterior, we'll need to face off against another horde of Heartless to achieve nearly the same result as before. The wizards are honestly the most annoying part of this, as their teleporting and thunder barrier can be seriously annoying. But with all that taken care of and the switch flipped, the second pillar will drop to create some steps for us to jump up to the small balcony. And though this method may have been the intended way to reach this doorway, it's honestly the more inconvenient. Instead, when reaching this part of the castle, you can actually perform a trick here known as Dumbo Skip, whereupon entering the battle you can summon Dumbo, rise up to the balcony in front of the doorway, and quickly dismiss him to grab hold of the ledge and run straight into the next area. And with entering the doorway and skating past the defenders, we'll find ourselves within the desolate and eerie castle chapel, a place that was once consecrated ground where the castle's residents sought refuge from the sins of everyday life, but now sits corrupted by the evil that now claims these hallowed halls. Historically, chapels located within the walls of a castle were a luxury that only a few could actually afford. Especially with a chapel like the one we see here, this would have been an extremely rare case, as these sacred rooms needed to be personally consecrated by saints to be used in suitable cases. Even within one of the most well-preserved and largest of the medieval castles, the Marksburg of Burbach, Germany, there was only a small chapel that could fit only a few people seeking prayer in their day-to-day. So, to see a chapel of this magnitude within Hollow Bastion, it helps to express the power that the Lord of Hollow Bastion had over its original residents, and potentially over the other worlds of the Kingdom Hearts universe. Moreover, this chapel features an odd mural above the altar that provides an interesting look into the mythology of this world, as not only does this mural portray the emblem of the Heartless, but also the twisting lines and snakes of the caduceus. Believed to have been a symbol of the messenger god Hermes within Greek belief, the caduceus is thought to have represented the connection between trade and negotiation, as providing goods and services to one person while that person does the same for you is thought to have been one of the most ancient systems of trade, connecting man to one another in the act of goodwill to better society. However, this isn't the only purpose of the staff, as it was thought to have held healing qualities and sleep-like effects to those who interacted with it. And given Hermes' role as a psychopomp, or in other words, a messenger of death, it begins to make sense why he would be the one to wield it. In this role, Hermes would actually attend to the dying or already dead, and with a gentle touch of his caduceus, would provide an easier passing for those who were dying. Contrarily, the caduceus was also capable of healing the deathly ill if a person's string was not yet at its end. And to this effect, the caduceus has become, in the modern day, a symbol of medicine and of the healthcare system. However, I do need to mention that although some modern healthcare systems do use the caduceus as a symbol, It is, in reality, the rod of Asclepius that is the actual symbol of medicine, as Asclepius was the Greek god of health and medicine. This actually brings up a fascinating topic, as the symbol of snakes being intertwined with one another is a symbol that's been seen in different parts of the world. Within ancient Sumerian belief, for instance, dating back to around 2000 BCE, the god of vegetation, Ningishida, held a similar staff depicting two snakes twisting around a staff that was thought to be the progenitor of the caduceus, though it's not only thought to be wielded by the god, but also a representation of him within ancient reliefs. In addition to this, the symbol of the caduceus has also been found on ancient coins of the Morai period in India that date to the rule of King Asoka of the 3rd century BCE, though it is uncertain whether this symbol was actually gained during his conquests of what is modern-day Afghanistan or through the trades with Greek and Persian traders. So then, why does this symbol show up here in the Chapel of Hollow Bastion? Well, more than likely, this is meant to convey that the ruler of this castle, be it Ansem or someone else, was someone who believed in the ancient use of the barter system, that whatever goods and services that the lord of the castle could provide would in turn receive the same. And seeing that the library we visited earlier was a wonder unto itself, it wouldn't be out of the question to suppose that he bartered in books and knowledge of the outside world. Of course, this isn't the only potential meaning, as when looking back to Greek myth, the caduceus was believed to have been actually a gift to Hermes from his brother Apollo, the god of light and of music. A gift that represented the power that Apollo had over the earth and over its chthonic creatures, with one creature in particular being Python, a serpent dragon that Apollo had slain at Delphi, which expressed the god's power over evil in the world. And it's with this connection as to why we find the caduceus here in this chapel, as not only is this a place of healing and of trade, but as we'll come to see, is also a place where we overcome great evil and slay a dragon.
I'm afraid you're too late. Any moment now, the final keyhole will be unsealed. This world will be plunged into darkness. It is unstoppable.
We'll stop it! After coming this far, there's no way we're gonna let that happen.
You poor, simple fools. You think you can defeat me? Me, the mistress of all evil!
And so we finally get to face against the mistress of evil herself, Maleficent, an evil fairy and master of magic who I just can't help but like. She's been stringing our gang all along, and now we finally get to take her down in spectacular fashion. Her methods are suitably powerful as well, as she is constantly stationed on her floating platform, and will always have defenders or dark balls by her side. And though her power and overwhelming presence may be intimidating, this fight is actually one of the easiest in the whole game, as all you need to do is use the gravity spell on her platform, which will instantly bring her down, and using stop whenever you can to stall out her meteor and lightning attacks, allowing you to get plenty of damage in, or even to heal, which will help you make it through this fight with only a few scratches. And before you know it, she's battered and beaten. Retreating to somewhere within the castle through her dark portal, we could happily jump in after her to chase her down and take her out once and for all. But I'd actually like to take this time to discuss Maleficent herself and the story of Sleeping Beauty. Now, before we jump into the story itself, I do need to mention that Maleficent herself doesn't appear in any versions of the actual Sleeping Beauty story, and was instead crafted for not only the Disney version of the story, but also from the evil fairy or evil witch that is seen in multiple versions of the story. Whether it's an actual fairy, as described in the story, or a wise old woman archetype, each version sees them cursing the young princess to die or fall into a deep sleep, sometime around their 15th or 16th birthday. Moreover, this trope of a fairy or old woman cursing people is a fairly ancient one that's been seen across various cultures, from the Sumerian Inanna to the Greek Circe, which eventually led to the belief in magical fairies throughout Western Europe during the medieval period. There, fairies were believed to be just as temperamental as humans themselves, who would just as easily help a person as they would be violent towards them. This, of course, would change with the rise of Christianity within the western and northern portions of Europe, as priests and many others in power would begin to associate the more pagan fairies with either demons or fallen angels, cementing the belief that fairies were evil and could potentially curse people for any reason, all of which leads to our story of Sleeping Beauty. Now, for the sake of clarity, I'll be going through the official inspiration for Disney's version of Sleeping Beauty as written by Charles Perrault in 1697. However, it is worth noting that some portions of the Disney classic do draw elements from the Grimm brothers' 1812 version of the story, Little Briar Rose. In ages past, there sat a magnificent kingdom where humans and fairies coexisted in harmony. But the king and queen were unhappy as they had no child. After many years of trying, their one true wish was granted, and they were finally able to conceive and give birth to a child of their own. To celebrate, the king and queen arranged a banquet for their friends, family, and even the fairies that they so harmoniously lived alongside. However, one of these fairies, an elderly woman who hadn't been seen in 50 years, arrived to find that there was no place set for her. Believing that she had been intentionally forgotten, she spat a curse at the newborn princess and declared that when she came of age, she would prick her finger on a spindle and die. Another fairy quickly spoke up after the aged fairy and counteracted the horrid curse to ensure that the princess would not die, but instead fall into a deep sleep that would last 100 years. With this, the king and queen ordained that no spinning of any kind shall take place, and ordered all to be destroyed or burned. 16 years passed, and the princess had grown into a lovely and curious young girl whom the entire kingdom loved dearly. Nevertheless, within her curiosity, she found an old staircase and climbed up the tower to meet an aged spinstress who encouraged the girl to try to spin the thread for herself. In an instant, the curse that the aged fairy had told nearly 16 years ago had come true, as the princess mistakenly pricked her finger on the needle and fell into the deepest sleep imaginable. The king and queen were distraught at the sight, but knew that their daughter had not died, but slept and would not wake for the next 100 years. With this, the good fairy put every maid, horse, and guard of the castle into a similar sleep, and as they could not bear the sight of their kingdom being lost to sleep, the king and queen reluctantly abandoned their kingdom. As the 100 years passed, the old castle remained with all its residents, as brambles, thorns, and vines covered its exterior. Thankfully, in this time, the kingdom had been claimed by a new family, and their young prince came to investigate the brambles, wondering if all of the stories he'd heard as a boy were true. With each step he took towards the castle, he found that a path had magically been made for him as the vines, trees, and bramble parted to give him clear passage. The prince held no fear in his heart as he ventured through the castle, finding good people sleeping that would not wake when stirred. But as he climbed the tower, he found the golden and sleeping princess who had been cursed as a baby. And as if ordained by a miracle, the prince knelt to her and she woke. And the two fell head over heels for one another instantly. Upon emerging from the tower, the rest of the castle awoke all at once, and the two young lovers were swiftly married. It's at this point that many of the variations would actually end, as the princess was freed from her curse and married to her prince. However, Perrault actually continues the story, as happily ever afters cannot be so easily granted. In this, Perrault continues with the prince returning to his kingdom and announcing to his father that he had found the long-lost princess and married her, having two children of their own named Day and Dawn in the process. However, the prince's mother, who held ill wishes for him and her husband, was in reality an ogress, and believed that the boy was instead lying about his time at the old castle. Sadly, just 2 years after that, the king had passed away, and the young prince was made the new king of the kingdom. And upon this, he officially declared his marriage to the formerly cursed princess. This deeply troubled the queen mother, as she wanted the throne for herself. However, an opportunity rose when a neighboring kingdom fought against the new king's forces, in which he entrusted his new queen and their children to his queen mother's care. With this opportunity, the queen mother sent away the girl and her children and ordered that she be served the eldest as dinner. Then the next week, the youngest all the same. Then finally, the new queen just as well. Yet, when the steward of the queen mother arrived to the new queen's chambers, he did not kill her, nor had he killed her children, telling her instead that he had hid them away and, in tricking his mistress, gave her already butchered animals to eat. He intended to do the same for the queen and hurried her off to his secret quarters to keep her safe and reunite her with her children. When the queen mother learned of her servant's treachery, she had a vat of toads, snakes, and serpents be brought to the courtyard for all to witness him, the queen, and her children be violently devoured. But just as she was about to throw them in, the king arrived home from his war to find his own queen mother attempting to kill his wife and children. Realizing that there was no way out, the queen mother jumped into the vat headfirst and was devoured in minutes. Thus, the kingdom was free of tyranny from the ogress, and the king and queen lived happily ever after. So, as you could probably tell, the story of Sleeping Beauty in Perrault's version is quite different from Disney's retelling of the story, as it's seemingly separated into two parts, with one part seemingly following the typical prince and princess trope, and the other in a way following the more traditional evil stepmother trope. However, the story's emphasis when considering its primary motif and mythology unsurprisingly ties into the themes of fate. As within the story, the evil fairy curses the baby to die by simple means, and even with the king and queen doing everything in their power to prevent it, they can't. In the end, Sleeping Beauty fulfills the prophecy and succumbs to her destined fate. This is something we went over during our time in Destiny Islands, but it's worth reiterating here that the belief in the fates was a prominent feature within Greek and even Norse mythology, with the spindle exemplifying this connection even further, as with the fates, Atropos, Clotho, and Lachesis being spinners who determined the fate of every being on Earth. Moreover, with prophecy and fate being prominent features here in Sleeping Beauty, the Greeks again provide us some insight, as oracles like those in Delphi, Epirus, and so on were thought to have presented prophetic tellings to those who questioned what their fate and even their children's fate was to be. In the tale of Oedipus, King Laius and Queen Jocasta of Thebes sought out the knowledge of the oracle at Delphi, and what the boy's future was to be. They were horrified to learn that he was destined to kill his own father and marry his mother. In secrecy, King Laius abandoned his son to prevent the prophecy from coming true, but in doing so, only ensured its occurrence. This myth not only helps us in understanding Sleeping Beauty's mythical inspiration, but also its purpose here in Kingdom Hearts, as Maleficent does everything in her power to prevent Sora, Donald, and Goofy from saving the many worlds by aiding each of the world's villains, but instead only strengthens Sora and ensures that he will be capable of defeating her and thwarting her plans to plunge all the worlds into darkness. And though she may be defeated here in this first fight, that doesn't mean that she's completely out yet, as with her retreating, Sora and the gang follow her to finish the job, but instead find an oddly darker Riku wielding a mysterious Keyblade, and one that he states will unlock the power of people's hearts.
Behold! Now, open your heart. Surrender it to the darkness. Become darkness itself!
This is it. This power. Darkness. The true darkness!
And there she is, Maleficent in her truest form. A dragon of pure darkness that truly demands your respect, as this is to be one of our toughest fights yet. Even on beginner difficulty, this fight can cause problems, as her bites are vicious, her ground slams can catch you off guard, her flames and fireballs can easily burn you, and her tail whip is long-reaching. In any way you tackle this, Dragon Maleficent will require some trial and error. Thankfully though, with our new summon, Tinkerbell, she'll ensure that we'll be able to survive the fight even if we take a lot of damage. Of course, Donald and Goofy sadly won't live long enough in this fight, but that's okay so long as you have summoned Tinkerbell early on in the fight. But even with all of the destruction she's capable of and how powerful she can be, she is still no match for us, and will eventually go down in a blaze of glory.
How ironic. She was just another puppet after all.
What?
The Heartless were using Maleficent from the beginning. She failed to notice the darkness in her heart eating away at her. A fitting end for such a fool.
As a reward for that incredible fight, we'll get the Fire Glow item, which, if you remember from our time back in Traverse Town, is fittingly Mushu, the last summon we'll receive in the game. And with our small fireball shooting dragon, he can pack a serious wallop in Proud Mode through something called damage storage, and will make most fights from here on out trivial. But if we look around as we stand here in the wake of one of the single best fights in Kingdom Hearts, we'll find that this arena is none other than
the highest room in the tallest tower.
Thank you, Shrek, which, funnily enough, plays off of the fairy tale trope of the damsel in distress being heroically saved by her knight in shining armor from the dragon that guards it. But why? Why does this trope even exist in the first place? And how do dragons fit into all this? To start, the trope of the damsel in distress is one that's been around for thousands of years. as the ancient Greeks had multiple stories in which a princess is placed in mortal danger and is subsequently saved by the hero. Perseus slaying Cetus, the sea dragon, to save Andromeda, Theseus wooing and, in a way, rescuing Ariadne from her tyrannical father, King Minos, and even Heracles rescuing Princess Hesione during the Trojan War are just a few examples of this kind of trope. But what's most important with all of these, and even the many tales that would come after them, is the fact that each prevent and even turn away from the more ancient belief of human sacrifice to appease the gods. As the Indo-European, who not only predate the Greeks and subsequently helped form the cultures and pantheon of the Peloponnese, were a group that saw human sacrifice as a fair and common ritual to please both the gods and the spirits that they worshipped. And as time progressed, people's perspective on what their gods truly wanted began to change as each society became more progressive, leading to animal and even ornamental sacrifices becoming the norm throughout the region. But we'll be discussing this in better detail a little bit later. That said, it wouldn't be until the medieval period and even into the Renaissance when some of the myths about princesses being potentially sacrificed to dragons would change to reflect the society of the time that altered the perception of a dragon as the story's monster, to a wicked stepmother, or evil witch, or even an ogre as the real villain within them. This was in part due to the fear that the nobility had when the right to rule was put into question. For if a king had a child and then remarried, then the stepmother would not have the power to rule unless she gave birth to a child of her own and removed the prior child from the line of succession. Of course, this act wasn't exclusive to this time period, as myths like Medea attempting to poison Theseus to allow her own child to claim the throne of Athens in Greek myth was one such story of an evil stepmother. But referring back to the princess as a damsel in distress, there is a motif within this trope that does connect to the story here in Kingdom Hearts, as the trait of the false hero is one that appears in a fair number of fairy tales as well. In this, the false hero is the one who claims to be the true hero who saves the princess, while lying about their prowess and their right to rule, all of which results in the real hero exposing the false hero's true intentions and then thwarting their plans. In the case of Sora and Riku, Riku would be the one who plays into this false hero narrative, as his quote-unquote heroism does not truly save Kairi and only exposes him further to the darkness, with Sora then playing the true hero part, who, spoiler alert, sacrifices himself to save Kairi and take his rightful place against the false hero. Focusing our attention now to Maleficent as a dragon, this not only plays off of her epic battle against Prince Philip in her original movie, Sleeping Beauty, but also plays to the fact that dragons have been some of the most evil creatures that heroes like Sora must vanquish to save the world from darkness. But have dragons always been this way? Well, this is actually a fairly complicated topic, as the view of dragons and even serpents in general can differ from culture to culture and region to region. In ancient Egypt, for instance, Apep, or Apophis, was the giant serpent dragon of chaos, and was believed to have traveled through the Duat to devour the light and the souls of the dead, sowing chaos among the cosmos. It was thought as well that each night came about through the sun god Ra traveling into the land of the dead to fight off this cosmic dragon and bring light to a new day. In contrast, the Han Dynasty of China during the 2nd century BCE and even prior to it viewed the dragon as a divine creature that helped create the people of the land, and as such became a symbol of the emperor himself as the divine embodiment of that dragon. emphasizing his imperial right to rule. As for the Mesoamericans, like the Mexicans, or the Aztecs as we'd call them today, they viewed the dragon Quetzalcoatl as a feathered serpent who ruled over the people and the priests of the region, being believed to be a multifaceted patron of wisdom, the arts, and of the sun. Now, these are just a few examples of the differing views of dragons, but each share the perspective that dragons were a supernatural force within the universe, even potentially being wholly separate from the natural world in some beliefs. However, this view would change somewhat during the Middle Ages, as conflicting narratives and differing ideas would combine to muddy the belief in dragons as a whole. In one tale from the Historia Regum Britanniae, it's believed that as a child, Merlin had witnessed a red and white dragon fighting under the Tower of Snowdon, which prevented the tower's full construction, and by revealing them, they witnessed the white dragon triumph over the red, and declared a prophecy that said that England would be victorious over the conquest of Wales. However, Merlin also prophesied then that the red dragon would revive and would return to rule some years later, which more than likely alluded to the coming of King Arthur some years later, though many also speculate that this may have represented the Christian thought of the devil rising up at the end of days. No matter which camp you're in, this legend exemplifies the muddied beliefs people held about dragons, as during this time, dragons were viewed as chthonic creatures who lived inside of caves or along riverbanks, rather than in the heavens like their divine brethren before them, even going so far as to equate the European dragon to Satan, with the Book of Revelation even titling the devil as a dragon. In stark contrast, dragons were also seen as powerful creatures that represented the truly noble, with figures like Owain Glendir depicting a golden dragon in both their seal and their crest, as well as the mythical King Arthur again, whose father, Uther Pendragon, took up the name Pendragon, believing that the dragon was a divinely inspired creature that represented leadership. With that said, the muddying I mentioned earlier may also derive from the conflicting perspectives on the different kinds of dragons, as the label of a dragon can land on numerous different serpentine animals, from worms to drakes, leviathans, and even wyverns. With each being different in appearance and mythologically, it can be a little confusing on which may be divine and which might devour the light. For this case, we'll be looking at the wyverns and even the European dragons. As my favorite of the many Heartless, the wyvern is actually a pretty fantastic interpretation of the beast, being depicted with their forelimbs as wings while retaining their back legs and tail. Anatomically speaking, wyverns are probably the most accurate representation of how dragons would actually look in our real world. Unsurprisingly, wyverns are probably one of the most ancient types of dragons that we know of, where they were traditionally depicted as winged snakes for thousands of years, with one of the earliest being the Egyptian goddess Wadjet, who presided over the city of Deb in Lower Egypt. And though she may have been one of the first, her depiction definitely differs from what we see wyverns as now. This was in part due to the Greek term for serpents, or snakes, being drakon, with creatures like Ladon of the Hesperides being called such. And as we move further into time, with Rome even growing in power and developing their Latin language, they would assimilate the Greek drakon into their own language with their word draco or dracones. As such, this assimilation of the terminology seemingly altered the understanding of the term, which had once resembled a snake, into a monstrous serpent that began to resemble what we now see as a dragon, with wyverns and winged snakes being described even in Ovid's Metamorphoses in multiple stories. And as we explored earlier on, the wyvern imagery would continue into the medieval period, when appearing on Owain's seal and crest with the golden wyvern. However, it wouldn't be until the early 17th century in the Display of Heraldry by John Guillaume that we would see an official distinction between the dragon and the wyvern, with the dragon being shown as having 4 legs and a set of wings, while the wyvern sat with 2 legs with a pair of wings, leading to many learning about the plethora of different taxonomical variations of dragons that many fawn over today in fantasy, subsequently allowing depictions like that of Maleficent's dragon form and the wyvern Heartless to coexist within the same world and be some of the best-looking enemies to date. But now, with Maleficent defeated, we can make our way back to the chapel to find that she had hidden a path from us that leads directly to our next destination. However, do save here, and probably make a new save file, because if we go past this point, every Heartless will become its highest leveled variant. And if you hadn't collected every puppy, torn page, or special item, now is absolutely the time to do it. But heading through the dark hallway that opened up for us, we'll end up at the very tip top of the lift stop. And this is by far the best view you'll have of the stained glass that we mentioned earlier. Surprisingly, there are only shadows here that block our path, which means that we can just walk past them to the Grand Hall, a marvel of architecture that perfectly frames the Heartless symbol and gate that lies just ahead of us. The walls of the first corridor are lined as well with the princesses whom we've tried so desperately to save. Alice, Belle, Snow White, Cinderella, Aurora, and Jasmine. You'd expect Ariel to be here, given her status, but I suppose they just couldn't make a tank of water work well enough. Crossing the room, it expresses to us that we're also crossing the line of no return, as the music stops and the sounds of our footsteps echo through the halls. The way is clear, but oddly enough, Goofy becomes separated from the party, which rightfully shocks Donald, and reveals to both Sora and us that Kairi is here and asleep. After all this time, we're finally able to hold her and see her up close. However, according to this double-voiced Riku, she's lost her heart and needs it returned to her to open the way to the keyhole. To be honest, this section is utterly eerie to me, as Riku just floats down from the top of the gate. His presence is so overwhelming that you can't help but feel afraid that this version of Riku is capable of completely wiping the floor with you. But I think I'll just let this scene play itself out.
Whoever you are, let Riku go! Give him back his heart!
But first, you must give the princess back her heart.
What's...
Don't you see yet? The princess's heart is responding. It has been there all along. Kairi's heart rests within you.
Kairi's inside me?
I know all that there is to know.
Tell me, who are you?
It is I, Ansem, the Seeker of Darkness. So, I shall release you now, Princess. Complete the keyhole with your power. Open the door. Lead me into everlasting darkness.
Sora! Forget it. You're taking Harry's heart?
Ansem Riku is undoubtedly one of the scariest boss fights in Kingdom Hearts, as many of his attacks and maneuvers from his first fight are present here while being expanded upon. His retaliation is quicker, he'll move out of the way of your attacks more often. On top of all of this, about halfway through the fight, he'll launch Dark Blades at you along with his attack, and will even launch into his DM just to catch you off guard the further you get into the fight, all of which forces you to bob and weave between his attacks. Surprisingly, however, all that you really need for this fight is counterattack. That's it. Just spam your attacks at him, and even if he parries your attacks, you'll just perform a counter, which will only stun him further. And even with his DM, as soon as he begins it, just jump and glide to the back of the stage. Then rinse and repeat while healing in between if you get hit. And at some point, you'll take him down for good. It's really that easy. And with this victory, we're given the Ragnarok ability, an extremely powerful special attack that not only has Sora swiftly attack his opponent, but also unleashes a volley of around 25 magic missiles that hone in on the target. Taking its name from the cataclysmic event within Norse myth that portrays the end of days, its event is described within the Prose Edda that shares that Thor and Jormungandr will battle to the death, and that Fenrir will be freed from his imprisonment to devour the All-Father, Odin. To be honest, it's a fitting ability to gain with the end of this long-standing rivalry, and with this Dark World's end. More importantly, however, is the fact that the Riku that we just faced wasn't really Riku, or rather was merely a shell of Riku with another, more powerful entity claiming his mind and body to achieve their goal. Within multiple faiths and cults of worship around the world, possession is a term that at times has been known by a different name, that being divine inspiration. In it, a person who opens themselves up to the divine, be it a singular god, multiple, or the spirits, would experience enlightenment through the divinity that enters into their body to either speak their will, or help those in need, or even condemn those who have scorned them. Some examples of this include the oracles who sat at the temples of Greece, such as Delphi, Epirus, and Delos, who, through their divine inspiration, provided prophetic predictions of future events to help the people speak directly to the gods and learn their will. As well, this same sort of act would be seen all over ancient Africa, as it's been found that many traditional African beliefs witness people becoming possessed by their gods and spirits to provide divination, especially during times of need and of drought. However, when looking at Ansem's possession of Riku, we can see that it isn't by divine inspiration, even though he opened himself up to it. This possession instead appears to be more oppressive and malevolent. In this case, it appears to be in line with the possessions found within each of the Abrahamic religions. As within the Hebrew Bible, familiar spirits, sometimes described as evil spirits, existed only to spread lies to people and to even make them sick both physically and mentally, as they were believed to have resided within the ruins of the ancient world and had been corrupted. Much in the same way that Ansem meticulously confuses and alters Riku's perception while primarily existing within the ruins of Hollow Bastion. The New Testament describes demonic possessions as a much bigger deal, and even within the story of the Last Supper in the book of John, chapter 13, it alludes to the fact that Judas had allowed Satan to enter into him and betray Jesus. And though this may have just been used to explain the darkness that Judas had in him, it can again connect to how Riku allowed Ansem to enter his heart to not only gain power, but to betray his friend, who really only sought to help others. Finally, within Islamic belief, jinns, as beings of air and fire, were believed to have been capable of possessing people to achieve their own goals. In this, jinns were thought to harm any person that they selfishly possessed, which resulted in that person being harmed in some manner, be it through convulsions or a more permanent psychosis, which again helps us to understand just how Ansem's possession over Riku resulted in him losing his heart and subsequently his body as well. With that said, I really feel that I should express that possession of a person, either by a divinity or a demon, has been the common explanation for thousands of years for someone experiencing some type of psychosis or mental disorder. Dissociative identity disorder, or DID, sees a singular person express alters that can change or be created through various stressors. Schizophrenia, another serious mental disorder, tricks the individual's mind to see or hear things that aren't otherwise there and can even alter or disorganize a person's speech, making it appear as though they are speaking in tongues. Now, these are just two examples, but I think it's worth noting that even through the mythology of possession as a fascinating topic, it also has some real-world implications that were not very well known until recently. So, if you or anyone you know experiences any sort of mental disorder or illness due to stressors, whether it be religious or not, please take the time to speak with a professional to get the help many don't know that they need. I've left a link to the National Helpline in the description for anyone who may need it. But after finishing off Riku, we may feel victorious for beating such a strong boss, but sad as well as his Keyblade drops and he just dissolves. You can clearly tell that Sora is still quick to run and save Riku, but even still, there's a job to do. You'd think that after all that we've been through here, we'd finally be able to seal the keyhole, just like all the rest of the worlds that came before. But we can't. As Ansem Riku had said before, Kairi's heart is the key to unlocking it. And that's locked away inside Sora's own heart, which I think I'll let this scene speak for itself.
A keyblade that unlocks people's hearts. I wonder.
Sora? Sora! Hold on!
This is such a tragic and yet heroic scene that's an absolute gut punch to the feels. This scene of Sora's self-sacrifice to save Kairi and the rest of the Princesses of Heart epitomizes the kind of person that he truly is. An individual who's willing to give up everything to help those in need, to give up control in one final act, and give that control back to those who have lost theirs. I had mentioned this during our time in Neverland, that Sora is fully aware of the social contract that he adheres to, so that he and the friends he meets along the way feel as though they have control of their actions and aren't forced to do things that may go against their nature. In this sacrifice, Sora consents to the tragic outcome, and does so without reservation, and even with a smile to add to that. No matter if it's religious or secular, sacrifice is seen as an exchange, where something good is gained at the expense of another. And in this concept of self-sacrifice, there are quite a few examples that provide various methods, but all provide similar outcomes. Within Buddhism, its founder Siddhartha Gautama was believed to be of royal lineage who rejected their life in luxury to exist as what is known as a wandering ascetic, where he would learn about the world and would labor to attain religious enlightenment. In doing so, his legend states that he spent years fasting as he traveled and eventually spent 7 weeks under the paipal tree while continuing to fast to achieve his enlightenment, eventually gaining it and teaching the path he called the middle way. Now, this may not seem like a traditional sacrifice, as I'll explain in a moment, but sacrificing one's own health in an effort to not only help yourself, but also help others, kinda defines self-sacrifice in its truest form. Similarly, the Titan of Forethought within Greek myth, Prometheus, was believed to have given up his comfortable life amongst the gods in favor of his creation, mankind, consequently tricking the gods and taking the sacred fire from them and giving it to man to help them become nearly greater than the gods themselves. Tasks in which he was fully aware of the punishment he'd receive, that being chained to a rock at Mount Caucasus and having his liver devoured by an eagle each and every day. A self-sacrifice that Prometheus was all too aware of as the Titan of Forethought, who willingly gave up his life and freedom to help the humans become greater. Lastly, with the crucifixion of Jesus. This story exemplifies the meaning of self-sacrifice just as well, as Jesus had fully accepted his death to atone for all the sins that man had committed. And with his arms spread out as he died, you can't help but see the same kind of imagery with Sora, as his arms are spread out just the same, being spread out in acceptance, dying or fading in a manner of speaking, while being fully knowledgeable of his actions, helping in freeing the princesses of Heart and freeing Kairi from her sleep. Of course, sacrifices in the ancient world weren't limited to giving up the self to help others, as throughout history, a variety of cultures would utilize different yet similar methods to gain blessings or to appease their local gods or spirits. Within the ancient rituals of the Vedic people, primarily in what's known as the Purusharmeda, kings would collect captured prisoners of war and symbolically sacrifice them, along with their animals, to appease the devas and exert their power over the region. I should say, however, that this rite is still debated today over whether humans were legitimately sacrificed. However, it has been confirmed that some animals, such as horses and goats, would be sacrificed upon sacred fires to bring blessings to the people of the region. Similarly, the Greeks, Egyptians, Sumerians, and many others would also commit to animal sacrifices to express their devotion to the gods, offering up the best parts of the animal on not only sacred fires, but also on altars to signify their own sacrifice of food to better themselves and their community, both spiritually and physically. Even in other parts of the world, such as among the Celtic people, animal sacrifices would at times be offered as thanks for a prosperous year. In ancient China, it would be the kings or potentially the religious authorities who would offer sacrifices in the form of animals and grains to the spirits and to their ancestors to help guide them in the future. Of course, it should be noted that each of these cultures around the world did practice human sacrifice at one point or another, as that type of sacrifice was viewed as the more appealing offering to the gods and/or spirits, showing the community's devotion and dedication to their cult of worship. Now, with Sora seemingly gone, you can just feel the desperation from Kairi as she finally had just a split second of being with him again, only to have him stripped away. And our perpetrator and true villain of our story, Ansem, the Seeker of Darkness, finally revealing himself to the group. However, our own Deus Ex Machina interrupts Ansem through Riku as he forces himself back into the world of the light to hold off Ansem and the other Heartless just long enough to give Kairi, Donald, and Goofy time to escape. Oddly enough, when I first played this part as a kid, I seriously thought that I was still in the cutscene, as I didn't actually expect to be playing as a Shadow. But here we are. Shadow Sora, or, well, Shadow Heartless Sora. It's adorable, to say the least. His little run and jumping animation is awesome. But throughout this section, you can't really do much besides those two things. And even so, we know that we need to catch up to Kairi and our friends, but how we do that is the main question. Thankfully, throughout our time here, you've probably noticed that certain spots and ledges don't have any railings, which actually is the way to go, and now makes it easier for us to catch up to our friends. And even through all of the jumps, if you do in fact end up back in the icy chasm, the lift there will quickly bring you back up to the front of the entrance hall to Hollow Bastion. Once there, we'll find our friends again, still questioning whether they should leave. There's some confusion when we finally return to them, but thankfully, Kairi, through her heart of pure light, sees straight through our facade and vows to protect us in our time of immense need. And through the gift of pure light, like a goddess bestowing the gift of life, Sora is resurrected from the darkness and is brought back into the world of light. This point in the story has, over time, confused a lot of people, as back in Traverse Town, when we learned what happens to a person when they lose their heart, it's thought that the person's heart was devoured and that the person disappeared from existence. However, in Sora's case, this doesn't happen, and he is instead transformed into a shadow that can maintain his thoughts and actions. This is more than likely due to Ansem Riku's Keyblade, which was made from the hearts of the other princesses of light, and when used on himself, more than likely shrouded his heart in pure darkness, as we never actually saw his heart drift off into the ether. And when Kairi used her light to protect him, this subsequently freed his heart from the surrounding darkness, allowing him to be resurrected. So, within a religious context, resurrection is an interesting subject, and though we have a general idea of its interpretation these days, in the ancient world, it was an extremely complex task that was seen as both divine and hellish. However, regardless of its complexity, the stories of a person's, or even the deity's, resurrection are meant to express the potential for immortality. The story of Osiris and his resurrection is one such story that is believed to be one of the oldest in human history. In it, Osiris's brother Set, the god of disorder, betrays and murders Osiris, the king and god of Egypt, out of jealousy, dismembering him and scattering his remains throughout the country. By the time of the New Kingdom, Isis, the queen and goddess of Egypt, had found her husband's body parts, and through the embalming process, while citing healing spells with the help of other deities like that of Thoth, resurrects Osiris and lays with him one last time. This copulation would result in the birth of the sky god, Horus, who would go on to avenge his father and reclaim the throne from Set. That said, as Osiris had been mummified through his resurrection and was, by all accounts, dead, he could not remain in the land of the living, and so with the help of Anubis, he claimed the Duat as his new kingdom to rule over for all eternity. This story, as one of the most ancient, is similar to the story of Jesus and his own death and resurrection, as Jesus was seen as the Son of God and Holy King of Israel, who was betrayed by another who was seen as his brother, killed, and then later resurrected, to then be placed as King of the heavenly afterlife. Of course, this is just an extremely brief synopsis, but you can see how similar these two stories are. And to be honest, the same can veritably be said for that of Sora, as he is just as well betrayed by his friend and one he sees as his brother, only to die in a manner of speaking, and is later resurrected. Of course, that is just one perspective, and when considering other religions' views of resurrection, some, like that of Buddhism and Hinduism, portray similar concepts of death and resurrection, instead placing a deep importance on the concept of reincarnation, where a person whose physical body dies, but whose spirit and mind remain, are subsequently transferred to a new body and a new life to start anew. Now, this concept, when considered within the broader Kingdom Hearts universe, connects beautifully with a few specific characters, but we're going to save that for when we eventually get to those games and those concepts. But I bring this up because both resurrection and reincarnation within a religious context emphasize the importance of immortality and its impact on a person's everyday life and faith, as nearly every faith provides a person with the promise of eternal life after their departure from their physical form. In Sora's case, we actually witness this when his body fades into nothingness, as he falls into that darkness where all hearts eventually coalesce, expressing that notion of immortality even with his resurrection, as stated back when we explored the hero's journey, thanks to the gift from the goddess, or, in this case, through the gift of the Princess of Light. But now that Sora has been brought back to life, Kairi has been recovered, and the beast helping us once again to secure our escape, he claims that he cannot leave here without Belle before he ushers us away to the only safe haven that we know of at this point, and a world that we've not fully explored just yet. But with our final time there, we'll get to learn all about it, and the friends who call it their home. To be honest, I don't think there's much more that can be said about Hollow Bastion. This world is absolutely massive, but it's an incredible one to explore and learn about through a new light. Between the use of stained glass to the concept of immortality, Hollow Bastion has been an absolute undertaking that's only getting me more excited to see it all through to the end. And if you're just as excited as I am, then do yourself a favor by joining our growing community of gamers and historians like Sarah Smith, DMT Infinity, Erickson James, Vagar Arnson, Ryan, and Steve over on Patreon. They are some of the most incredible people, and I cannot thank them enough for your kindness. So if you'd like to join them, links as always are going to be in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.